Hi, we're at FPAC, the Festival of Philippine Art and Culture. There it is, at MacArthur Park here in Los Angeles, and this is Camper Snap Sessions. I'm Danny Bernardo, the host for this session, and I've got the great privilege this entire festival of hanging out with all of the artists who've been performing on stage, but I had to talk to one of the artists that was actually presenting in one of the booths. So this is Mark Nazal with Dewata Comics.
Hey guys, my name is Mark. Is this on?
Yeah.
My name is Mark.
Yeah.
I'm one of the co-founders of Dewata Comics. Dewata Comics is a diversity-focused, but also because of our heritage, a Filipino-American indie comics company that's looking to tell stories from all backgrounds of people from our culture and subcultures. I think of how that journey kind of went for me. Am I going a little forward, or
You're
do you
fine.
want me
You're
to kind of
great.
Go ahead? All right. So
tell your story,
so
man.
how that journey kind of came about is, so I've worked in the film industry. Let's say I'm getting into my, no, I'm already in my decade, I guess. But I grew up not really thinking that this was an industry I could be a part of, because I grew up in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. So to me, this world was far removed. So what happened was, in 2017, one of the pivotal moments was we won an Emmy for Gotham. And that changed something for me psychologically, because if that could happen, what else could happen? And I also did notice that when moments like that happen to you, people tend to pay more attention. And when they did, I realized that there was a responsibility attached to that. And so I started to, get to know some of the film creative communities, and I didn't realize how big the Filipino American creative community was here. So there I met Joe Arciaga and Erica Juliet, my collaborators with Dewata Comics. We started writing stories. At first, we started with a short film, but during the pandemic, we had to pivot to tell our stories in different ways. That's when we met our fourth co-founder, Roland Amago, who is Philippines-based. And I think what really kind of came to it was this beautiful amalgamation of talent, both here and there, and the fact that he, being over there, intrinsically understood Philippine mythology in a visual language that we couldn't comprehend. And so I would argue that he made our stuff so much more impactful just by his participation. So what we're trying to do here, once again, is being able to tell stories that provide stories from different spectrums of the Filipino community and Filipino American community, in all facets of who we are, and also bring those stories with mythological elements and fantasy elements to life, because let's face it, everybody loves a fantasy and magical story, right?
I mean, fantasies where you can get away with actually making comment on real world stuff. What I think is great about the story of Dewata Comics and how y'all came about is that you're talking about the Filipino experience, and you have diverse, you have a very diverse in terms of perspective and stuff with your colleague in the Philippines. But what I'm really interested in is, especially because you're one of the co-founders, we've in our pre-talk you were talking about being third culture and growing up in so many different, how is that perspective really shape your work in looking at the Filipino American lens?
Well, I think, being a third culture kid is a strange case, or I wouldn't say a strange case. It's more common today than it's ever been with...
And just really quick, for those who might not know what third culture is, can you in your own words explain?
A third culture kid is an individual who grows up outside their culture. You could even argue that being Phil-Am, if you grow up in a community that doesn't have a full substantial Filipino community, you could be considered a third culture kid because you grow up outside of your culture. And so for me, growing up in the Middle East and then Australia, then moving here, I definitely find connections with so many different things from different cultures that I tend to borrow over time, because my connection is different. I didn't grow up with a strong Filipino community. I would say, yes, we had a lot of Filipinos, but it wasn't like here. I feel like here it's interesting, where the Filipino community really has roots and starts really laying a foundation for their kids here. But that's not everybody's experience. And I think for us at Dewata Comics, we're multi-generational, but we're also multicultural in different ways, because as an example, Erica is first generation American. She grew up in a Filipino community in Oxnard, in a military base. Joe is an immigrant, but he came here at such an early time and was always involved in the Phil-Am community. Whereas I came at I think I came at about 16. No, I came at 17, but I was never part of a major Filipino community, so I ended up growing up with every other community that I ended up with. So I think what Dewata Comics also represents is all those different perspectives, because when you say Filipino American or Filipino OFW, that is not one experience, but that is so many varied experiences, and
Yeah.
we want to be able to put a not magical, but a foundation of that, but in terms of like creating compelling characters with fantasy backgrounds, because like you said, it's a fantastic way to be able to put actual real world messages while in a format that everybody can just enjoy.
Yeah, now, so what I love about what you just said and all of your colleagues and the perspectives is it makes it a really fully faceted, fully wholly realized
Group?
group.
Yeah.
And so we were talking, I don't want to name names and say things, but in our pre-talk we were talking about how we really wish that some of the rooms of the books we read with some representation was as diverse and as reflective as your group.
Yeah, to kind of like speak to that, like one thing that I'm really proud of that we really pushed for in every Diwata Comics title is that we want to push for language authenticity. What I mean by that is, if you're here, if the character is here and the character's talking to other English-speaking characters, of course it's going to be in English. But if there is a character that is speaking in a native language, and when I say native language, it's not always Tagalog, right? Because we have Tagalog, we have Visayan, we have many other dialects. We want to be able to represent that on page, because I think we exist now in a very interesting time where people are so receptive of different cultures and different languages. In fact, here in Los Angeles alone, some of the Diwata Comics fans that we've found over time were not Filipino, but they've never heard of Philippine mythology. So now, just as growing up, we've been big fans of Greek, Roman, and Norse mythology, now you have fans of Philippine mythology because it's in a format that's accessible to them.
That's great.
And I think that's important.
Now, I do want to make sure we have enough time to talk about, we've been talking about the how and the what,
how
and
and why.
let's talk about the meat.
Okay,
Carmina,
so-
your flagship book.
Meet Carmina. So Carmina, actually, I would call Carmina our intro character, because she only represents one beginning for Diwata Comics. The story of Carmina is about a young woman who lives in a small, dreary town in New Mexico who finds out that she's half Diwata. For people in the Philippines, I know that that's a pretty common theme. You know what that is, but for the people in the audience that may not be aware of what a Diwata is, Diwatas, in theory, are gods and goddesses from Philippine myth. And I know there are people in the audience that are like, no, they're more like wood nymphs and fairies. Well, if you take a look at the history, really, when the Spanish came, they wanted Philippine religion to sort of like degrade, and they wanted to lessen the power of Philippine deities. So they started like changing the influence of what Diwatas were to the natives or to the Filipinos back then into lesser beings. But in truth, if you really take a look at much older mythology, Diwatas tend to be gods and goddesses in the Philippine mythology pantheon. And I think it's interesting to kind of like do this contrast of this young woman in a very, let's call it, desperate and dreary situation in this small town where she's the only minority, one of the only minorities, and make her a powerful character. Because I think one of the things too, right, from a Philippine perspective, like when we see stories about us, it's always magnified and only in one perspective. I think we want to take some people kind of come from much more humble beginnings, but don't ever assume where they're going to end up, because you don't know the trajectory of where they find themselves.
Man, that is so
into.
representative of the Philam experience and like the experience of
exactly.
Filipinos all over the world. And what I love, I mean, just to touch on what you're talking about, what I love is with what you're saying about how the Spanish influence really kind of squashed down the original, is that you've reclaimed it in the name for your company, and you've reclaimed the Filipino spelling of comics. I think that's just amazing.
I think that's the other part I wanted to really talk about, is not a lot of people know that there is such a fantastic comic subculture in the Philippines. I would say that at first I thought it was truly inspired by the American occupation of the Philippines, but over time, as I find out, as I learn from many different folks, it actually precedes that. There is a beauty to Filipino comics with a K, and feel free to definitely, Google that really quickly, because you'll find so many fantastic titles that I think if given the opportunity over time, could become like our anime.
Yeah.
Like it could very much become our manga, and I think that that's a really cool opportunity. So what we're doing here is we don't want to assume that we're the only people doing it, but we're giving an opportunity for visibility to that. So people ask, why is your comic spelling that? And that's a very easy answer to, to get.
Well, I mean, just with your background in the entertainment industry and your perspective and your passion, I'm really glad. I literally bought every single book they had before I pulled him in. Yeah, so I cannot wait to read these. And if any of our viewers want to read Diwata Comics, how can they find you online or on social media?
Yeah, find us on DiwataComics.com. Like, one of the things that I'm really insistent on is the felt experience. So you'll notice that we do limit our digital sales platforms because we want to encourage people to own these books, to actually have them and collect them. So more than ordering it online, I highly urge you guys to find us at the next comics convention where we'll be signing copies. The next convention we'll be at would be LA Comic Con in December, but also for folks in the Bay Area, we'll be at the Filipino, oh my god, I don't know the exact wording, but please feel free to find it, the Filipino Book Festival that's happening at the San Francisco Central Library. So
Nice.
Feel free to find us there. We're super excited to meet our fans in the Bay Area. But more so than that, reach out, and if you have any place that you would think would be fantastic for us to visit, let us know. We'll look into our schedules and find a way there, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time
thank
with
you
us,
so
Mark.
much.
Yeah, of course. So, my friends, to find out more about Film Arts, visit filmartsla.org, and to find out more about Camper Sessions, visit sessions.campersnaps.com.
Oh, and last but not least, DiwataComics.com and Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DiwataComics with a KOMIKS.
K is very important. Mabuhay, everyone.
Thanks
Have a
all.
great